We'll find out. We'll find out later today when I try to do all this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, I guess if we got little clamps, we could clamp our mics on here, and then we'd just be sitting here with our mics in our faces and our headphones on, yapping at each other.
Mm-hmm.
God, that's going to be so funny. Weird. So I thought of this, and I don't know what your thinking on this is. Like right now we're a once a week podcast, and I was like, well, maybe, I mean, there's still plenty of topics to talk about, but if we ever decided to do it a little different, like next year, we could get together on Sunday and we could record 7 episodes, like one for each just for today. They'd all be like 25 minutes or something. And then we could just put them out once each day. But then we'd be an everyday podcast, and then how do you get back off of that? Unless you don't. Maybe we just find different books that have different everyday spiritual readings. I mean, there's a shit ton of them out there.
Oh, yeah.
AA's got
Jen
one.
posts tons of them on.
Right.
She's got all kinds.
There's one for men in specific.
Brene Brown.
Yeah.
Shit, all that shit.
I don't know. That idea came to me last night. I was like, I don't know.
So we would still do our regular one on Sunday plus the daily one?
Well, no. I was just thinking instead of recording like 3 hours on Sunday, we'd still record 3 hours. It would just be 7 25-minute or 7 20-minute recordings instead of doing one long recording for Sunday. Like almost not if we ran out of topics.
I probably wouldn't I wouldn't listen.
You wouldn't like that as much?
I feel like, and this is just me, and this isn't just with recovery, this is anything. I feel like recently I've been looking into, all right, Marxism. Everybody keeps throwing around Marxism. I'm like, all right, well, I want to fucking figure out what is Marxism. Like, I have a general idea, but I want to learn about what is Marxism, what's so dangerous about it. What I can hear in a 25 or 30 minute podcast is so surfacey and so not informative enough. It's like someone's 7 general takeaways, which really don't seem helpful to what I want to know. And then if I listen to 4 different 20 minutes, because I have listened to 4, they all seem to say something a little bit different. So then I'm like, well, fuck. I need like a person to kind of explain better. You know what I mean? Like I need a deeper understanding of this rather than just this cursory, like, this idea sounds great. It'll be great. So anyway, that's just me, and we're doing a different subject. So
I think a lot of people struggle with people have these 20 and 30 minute commutes, and they like nice little convenient pocket-sized things.
Oh yeah.
Just from what I've read, it seems like the majority of people like that 30-minute or less roundabout version of a podcast. Not that we need to cater to anybody. We do what we do. Other people do that. That's fine. But I also thought about the idea that, like, what are we, like, at some point we do run out of topics, don't we? Like, do we? I don't know. I'm still trying to figure this out. I thought there was 1 billion, and now I'm like, I don't know. We're like only 40 episodes in, and I'm kind of like, what are we going to do next time we don't have a person on? Or I have no clue what the fuck we're going to talk about.
I don't know. Something will come up. Life will happen.
It could.
There's all this racial stuff. I've been trying to think of where to go with any of that.
I'd like for somebody to come on and talk about it.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking too. And who could we have, or who would be good, and then
I just listened to a podcast yesterday. It was offered for free. Somebody sent it to me from social work, and I was going to forward it to you, and I forgot to in the email. But it's Hey White Therapist, and it's got some more to the title, but that caught my attention. I was like, what? But it was all about like white privilege and how we address that from the therapy chair, and it's interesting shit, man. I don't know. It just really is to me. It's something, I guess, that I'm always thinking I don't know the answers to. So I always want to hear more. But I don't know who's in recovery that could point out, like,
Is that recording?
Yeah.
Or no? Okay.
Don't want to say that?
No, I was going to say some names, and so I'm not going to throw out some names like that.
I gotcha.
If that's recording. So we can talk about that later. So.
Like I said, I'm just not familiar with anybody that's really on top of the information and has looked at 12-step meetings or groups from that lens.
Yeah.
That also has credibility, I guess, is what I'm...
And yeah, so I was thinking of it too, and I thought, I don't necessarily care if they're pro or anti or have an opinion about it specifically, like whether programs are racist or systemically racist or any of that stuff. Just what is their experience as a person that, you know, is a minority in, let's say, an area like this, or the one person I was thinking of, they go to meetings in this area, but then they go to meetings outside of this area up in Wilmington also, where it's the opposite, you know what I mean? Where it's, they're not the minority there, which is why they go there, because that feels more comfortable, but they still participate and go to meetings down here too. And is that different? And what is, you know?
See, I not gonna lie, totally want to cherry pick who we put on here because I want them to have the insight that I'm looking for. And I just feel like most of the people that I've encountered are very... And look, this could be my own ignorance to never truly asking them to dig deeper. Maybe they have a lot of thoughts about it and I've just never asked, right? But it seems like they go with the flow so well that they're, like, a lot of people are blind to this on both sides. I think there's definitely people of color who are just as blind to some of this as white people are, or at least not as informed and don't know how to, haven't been educated on some other ways to look at it, right? That may or may not be true. And so I'm like, I don't want to get somebody on here that's not aware of some of that. Like, I want that aware. I want somebody to come on here and teach me some shit about what I'm not seeing, basically. And so I feel like if they're not seeing it either, that's not going to be useful to me.
Yeah. Well, and I worry sometimes as being two white males, like, am I going to say something unintentionally that's offensive or unintentionally that's, you know, that I don't even know, and then have to feel like I'm supposed to, because... And this is where I'll get myself into trouble. I'm not going to sit here and apologize for something that wasn't my intention. You know what I mean? If I didn't intentionally...
I will.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's like, do we really have to be held accountable for things we don't even know? Like, is that really a thing? Yeah. I mean, I like to say when I apologize for things, I mean it sincerely. And if I caused harm in some... I mean, I say that. If I caused harm in a way... that, okay, if I unintentionally caused harm, that's one thing. If what I said is taken and then made out to be something else, I'm not okay with that.
The podcast I was just telling you about talked a lot about how the difference, it talked a lot about why white people struggle with the conversation and with seeing a lot of it. And because it got so deep into it, dude, I was loving it. He talked about, it really didn't get that deep, but as a starter conversation, it got to a lot of stuff. And it talked about white privilege and racism are systems. And people take personal offense to it as if we're calling them white privileged or racist. It's not a personal thing. It's a system that exists already. Like, we're just a part of it, right? But we're blind to it. But we want to take it. I'm not racist. I don't have privilege, right? But it's not that. It's a system. And so...
I get some of that.
Well, then he dug into the intent versus impact. Like, there's two different things. And a lot of us don't intend to be racist, which is why we take such personal offense when people say that we are racist or white privileged, right? But it doesn't matter what the intent is. It's the impact. It's very much like AA talks about. We walked around with all these great intentions when we were, using... But nobody judged us by our intentions. They judged us by the impact that the actions had on everybody.
Right, but there's some... So, if you take it out of race context and put it into political context, this is what goes on in our politics, too, all the time. It's like when I say something, it now is subject to the worst possible interpretation becomes my intention behind what I just said. You know what I mean? And that's not fair.
Well,
It's like an argument I'll get in with my wife. You know what I mean? I say something, and then she says, "Well, now you're just saying you don't want to listen to me because I said something that wasn't that. That isn't what I said." You know what I mean?
Right.
But she heard it that way, so now I'm supposed to apologize for that. And I will say, "No, that isn't what I meant. That wasn't what I was saying. You're hearing it that way, but that's not what I was trying to say. Let me try to explain that a different way." I guess that's the argument that I will tend to find myself in.
And I would say that if somebody got hurt by something I said, it doesn't matter what my intent was. They were hurt by it, and I'm sorry that they're hurt by it. Period. It doesn't change my intent. My intent wasn't to hurt them. And so I'm going to follow through with intending to not hurt them, and I'm going to apologize for them being hurt. Might not apologize for what I said, but I definitely will apologize for the fact that they're hurt by it. Like, that's not my goal. I don't need to explain it to them, so that I don't need to explain them out of being hurt, I guess. Like, I'm sorry you're hurt by that.
I don't know. I think that's dangerous shit, though, when we start allowing everything we say to be subject to the worst possible intention. I just think it's a dangerous habit as a society that we get into that everything we say is judged by the worst possible interpretation of meaning.
I don't know that it's necessarily judged by the worst possible interpretation. I just think that other people have other experiences, and what you're saying is pulling that out of them. If my father always said some critical thing to me in a shitty way, but he, masked it with some passive aggressiveness, and then you say something that similarly brings that out of me or reminds me of that exact trauma that I've been through, like, that wasn't your intention to hurt me. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to be hurt by it. It's not that I interpreted it in the worst way possible. It's just reflecting some of my experience and pulling that out. And just because you don't have that experience with your father saying that specific thing to you, you can't understand why I'm hurt by it. But it doesn't matter if you understand it or not. I am. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think I was trying to...
Yeah, but I'll flip that around and say, okay, so and this is, my play on that is, as a person who was sexually abused, there are situations or things that come up in whatever people say or share or conversations or whatever that will remind me of that sexual abuse, and I might be hurt or put in an uncomfortable position. I don't feel like that person owes me an apology, that they harmed me in some way because I took a feeling out of something that they said, or what they said somehow brought up, something from my past that makes me feel bad. I don't feel like that's their responsibility to me.
So let's not put it in terms of they harmed me, but were you harmed when it got brought back up? Was that harming to you? Like, it hurt you, right? To bring it back up? Well,
and there we go with harm. So is having an uncomfortable feeling being harmed? I would say no. I would say that me having a bad feeling is not harm. That's another area where words get a little tricky nowadays. Nowadays, you can be assaulted by words and assaulted by feelings. And we're crossing this line where words have as much impact as physical assault, and you know what I mean? It's like, wait a minute.
Well, if you read the neuroscience, you're a guy who loves science. If you read the neuroscience about it, like in The Body Keeps the Score, revisited trauma is stored in the body just like it's happening right now. It never leaves. And so anytime that it's brought back up in a PTSD kind of way, anytime there's something that reminds you of it, you're reliving the pain just like it's happening right this second.
Sure, and that I would agree with that, but where I would go is, okay, so whose responsibility is that? Is that your responsibility as the person with PTSD to know how to manage that? Or is it mine as a totally oblivious individual walking around the earth that anything that I say at any time could trigger someone's PTSD? You know what I mean? Like, the individuals have to take... And it wouldn't be bad for me to say, hey, excuse me, I don't like if we talk about this because it brings up trauma from my past. Oh, hey, no problem. We can stay away from that. But to immediately put me into some category as, maybe whatever, some kind of inappropriate or some kind of wrong because I said something that triggered a feeling it's like, whoa, wait a minute.
and this is where the talk is interesting, because it's like there are going to be people on an extreme version of this, and I've encountered this on Twitter where, I was apparently mansplaining something to... It was somebody really on the extreme side who held me at fault for saying something that I was truly trying to be helpful with, right? My intention was never to hurt them. And I followed through with the intention to never hurt them. Oh, I'm sorry. I did not mean that. I appreciate you explaining that to me. Thank you, right? Thank you again. And they kept, I was like, okay. That's going to exist. People are going to do that. But I think what you're talking about is there a way to avoid those people, ultimately those few on the extreme doing that? And I don't think there is, but I don't think that needs to make me, it's the regression to the mean, right? Like, you're seeing people out here on this extreme, and so in order to counteract that and bring about an average or a mean in the middle, you've got to move out here and worry about whose responsibility it is, instead of, hey, I'm Billy and I give a fuck about you. I'm sorry that was said. That's where you want to be.
Well, and it roped some of this back around towards addiction. You might see some of this with addiction, and I guess this is where I go with that is, yes, like I believe addiction is caused by a lot of trauma, abuse, all those things. But I don't think you can then say, okay, well then it's just okay if you're an addict and run around and cause a bunch of harm. Like, no, you had all this trauma and all this, and we should give you some, I don't know what the word would be, empathy, leeway, some whatever. But at some point, you got to take responsibility for that shit. Like, yes, you were victimized as a kid, and that's terrible, and we can talk and deal with that. But that doesn't excuse like shitty behavior, whatever the shitty behavior is. In this case, we're talking about addiction. Maybe in the other extreme, it's talking about insulting people, calling everybody a racist, saying everybody's ignorant, belittling, and
I think you're bringing up a great point with addiction, and this is what our program teaches us, and this is what the law says too. The intention of addicts is never to harm other people. The intention is always moving through it to try to find a way to cope with the fucking negative and hateful, self-centered belief systems they've established from the trauma they've experienced as children, right? So their intention is never to harm others or to harm society or to steal or to end up in prison. It's just to find a way to cope with life when it's really painful, right? But that doesn't make them not responsible for the impact. They're still responsible for the impact no matter their intention.
But my point is there are levels to that shit. And the addict who, let's say, maybe just to use myself as an example. Like, I maintain a job and I did some illegal shit. I drank and drove and risked people's lives. And that's not to minimize. I'm not trying to minimize my responsibility of my addiction. Right. But that, to me, is far different than someone that's out armed robbing people with a gun in the city or beating the shit out of people to steal their wallet. Like, the level of harm is different. You know what I mean? Like, there are degrees of harm that we cause in our lives. And so, from a social perspective, I would say, we need to lighten up on certain drug crimes while as not ignoring others. You know what I mean? Like, so if you're out, whatever, you get caught with possession of weed or, even possession of heroin for that matter, do we really need to lock you in jail? Maybe not. But if you're out armed robbing old ladies or beating up people in the street to steal their purse or their wallet, that's fucking violence, man. That's a next step in that progression that requires a little more accountability and a little more consequence. And I think those ideas, this levels of that stuff applies to like racism and sexism and things like that. There are people that are unintentionally racist and unintentionally sexist, chauvinistic, whatever. And it doesn't excuse that. It doesn't make it okay. It's not like, oh, it doesn't matter. But you also can't hold that person to the same level of accountability as like a white supremacist or a outwardly racist person. Like, those are different degrees of harm that you're causing in those behaviors.
I agree with that. I think that's how the legal system works. Like, the crimes that are more minor, you have a year sentence, and the crimes that are more major, it's a life sentence. You know what I mean? Like, there's a large variety, and I think you're responsible for the law whether you know the law or not. So you could be unintentionally breaking the law and you're still guilty. And I guess that just goes back to what I'm not saying that everybody should be accountable at the level of their accountability, right? Okay, you committed a small crime, you're still accountable. You committed a crime. I think we need to look at, in that particular instance, how we address the crimes. Like, just throwing them in a cell for years isn't really helping. Maybe we should try some real rehabilitation, like therapy, and, dealing with some of the traumas that cause people to do these types of things might help some people. But going back to the original thing of people taking what we said in a different way, yeah, I don't think we should say, oh, Billy, you're just as bad as a KKK member because you unintentionally said that. But I do think we're responsible for what we say, even if we don't realize it's harmful.
But I think that's kind of what happens when you start lumping people into this racist category. You know what I mean? If I say Jason is a racist, I talk to him on a regular basis and he's a racist. People have a pretty, I'd say, distinct understanding of what that means.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they don't parse it out to be like, well, what level of racist? Like, you might as well be in the Klan. If I say I've heard you talk about things and you're a racist, people are going to think you're like fucking in the Klan. You know what I mean? Like, that's just where that language, where we start using these words to say, you know, well, you're a racist, then that puts you in a category of things that isn't, that sounds pretty extreme.
So what this guy talked about on the podcast was racists aren't bothered by the fact that you call them racist because they already know they are and they believe that. They aren't bothered by it. The people who are bothered by it are people who aren't trying to be racist and they're unintentionally there, and we have yet to find a way to break through with conversation for them to understand that this isn't a personal attack on who they are. They've just been grown in a society where this is the systems that act, and they've been a part of it and not seen it because it's just part of their everyday life. And so when you call someone a racist and they're highly offended, chances are they're not trying to be, right? That's the whole point of it. Like, people who are racist aren't offended by that. They're like, yeah, fuck people. I hate them.
Yeah, but I would say that my understanding of the definition of racist doesn't, that I'm not that. Whether
and a lot of people don't think they are.
And that's where, so that gets into Marxist ideology, which is like the oppressors can't even possibly understand what it's like to be the oppressed. So I am not even allowed to have an opinion about those things. I just have to take the insult. And I'm not allowed to have any say against it because I'm the oppressor, so I don't understand what it's like. They understand it from my perspective, but I can't understand it from their perspective. And I don't think that's a fair conversation to have. It automatically puts me, you know, in a space of, if I don't agree, I'm a racist. And as long as I agree, you're going to call me a racist. So
I think it's super interesting that all these ideals, I feel like, are things you've said to me before about other topics and believe in, but in this instance you're having like some pushback to it a little bit. Like you express frequently to me, and you're a great reminder to me of what I need to know, which is I can't ever think I know what's right for other people because they have different experiences, and I can't possibly have ever had their culmination of experiences and know how to react to that from where they are. And that's like a big thing in therapy too. Like all through, you know, my social work education, it's all like every person is unique. I can't possibly, I might have gone through something similar, but I've never gone through exactly what they have. And so I can never really like deny them whatever it is they're experiencing. It's real for them, whether I believe it or not. And so I feel like you remind me of that all the time. And I love, it's one of my favorite things that you remind me of, honestly. I need that reminder constantly. And yet here, you almost don't, you want to push back against it a little bit. Like, well,
because I don't want to deny their experience. I don't want to, like, it's not, I'm not trying to deny how that makes them feel. The difference is now they get to call me a name or make a judgment or categorization about me based off of how they feel. I'm not trying to take away, like, I don't even necessarily disagree that there's not systemic racism and we can't sort of figure out, oh, okay, I see how that works. I see how that is. But if I'm, like, if I'm not even aware that I'm participating in it, but I'm aware of that, that makes me a racist. Like now there's a judgment. I feel like the difference is there's now a judgment being placed on me. If I said, oh, well, those people can feel however they want and it, you know, it's not up to me to fix it, but they're fucking idiots, so who really cares? That's different. You know what I mean? Now I am indirectly diminishing their point of view or making it less than or making it something else.
So when are people calling you names, though, I guess, is what, like, if I'm if I'm approached by people and they say, hey, we're noticing this behavior of yours in your daily life, right? Then this is how we see it from our side. My goal, hopefully, is to just be open to hearing that information and to evaluate it. Kind of like if anybody called me out on a 6-step thing, right? Oh, am I doing that? Damn, is that really what it's like for other people around me? That's rough. I don't think they're going to call me a name over that. They might, but I guess if they do, I'm not really going to think much about it because it's... I mean, anybody could call me a name. That doesn't mean that I've been that. Like, if I'm really trying to live my best and listen to what these people are telling me and at least take it into consideration, what name are you going to call me? A racist? Okay, I'm sorry you feel that way. Like, I don't think I am.
True, except for some of this now, we're talking about changing public policies and changing laws based off some of this stuff. It's just in conversation, it's one thing, but it's not when we're talking about changing public policies or public practices or laws, based off that. Then it gets a little more.
I think the important thing, or at least one of the important things that podcast talked about was like...
What's it called?
I'll shoot you the email with it. You have to sign up, but it's just one of the things where you'll probably get emails the rest of your life for dumb shit after you sign up. But
I just unsubscribe.
And
then they send me all their spam.
What was he talking about? It was 2 white people that did it too, and he was like, "Well, what gives us the right to have this conversation and all that?" And it was just the point of we, as the oppressive. And I guess he got into this too, something you had brought up before, like we can't have white pride or any of that. And the fact is we can't. Once the words have been taken by bad people, it's like you can't put a swastika anywhere. That wasn't a terrible thing to begin with, but it doesn't matter anymore, right? Like, it's over. We just can't. It is what it is. That doesn't mean we can't be proud of who we are. Like, yeah, I'm cool. I'm a white guy. I'm proud of that, I guess. I don't know. Whatever. I don't really feel any particular pride about it, but I just am who I am. But I guess what he was getting at was we can't really know what the right thing to do is. And if we as a people all want to heal and grow together, we need to listen to people who have experienced this when I haven't. I don't know what it's like on a daily basis to have my skin color come into every fucking thing I do.
Right.
Are people going to look at me weird because I'm writing a check?
And I guess here's what it almost feels like. I guess I'll try to analogize it because I like to do that with everything. So if, like, I work for an oil company, right? Work in office, do a lot of things. Let's say that my company, unbeknownst to me, we're dumping thousands of gallons of fucking oil out into the creek out back or whatever, dumping it out into the ground. But I don't really know it. I work there, you know what I mean? Maybe if I really did a bunch of background investigation and started doing a bunch of stuff, I might have been able to figure it out. But I didn't. And then we find out, oh shit, the ground's all polluted. Your company's responsible. So then I'm responsible for that now? Like that's my fault in some way? Like, I'm not saying I shouldn't, hey, I get it. That was terrible. We shouldn't do those things. We can change that. We can do some things to fix that. I'm all on board with the fixing of things. But then to say, well, you're the asshole that polluted the fucking creek. It's like, well, not really.
So I would say this. If you stay at the company when the company doesn't really make changes, you kind of own some responsibility there, right? If you decide after it all comes out that it happened and the company's still kind of like, hey, sorry, but they don't really give a fuck and you know this and you still continue to work there, that kind of puts you in the category of being a little responsible. Like, I'll just stay here even though nobody seems to care. If people came to you along the way, like residents of that nearby that creek, and said, hey man, they're fucking polluting out here, it's not cool, and you just ignored it the whole time and never even bothered to look into it or take it seriously, you're borderlining on responsibility now. Like, there's some things that we've done, I think, where we just ignore it, or we're in a position to do something about it and we don't care. That kind of, like, we want to keep the status quo.
Sort of, but position of, I guess, okay, so if there's, like, I don't know, like, let's take racist policies in our community, for example. I'm in Cecil County. I wouldn't deny that they're here. You know what I mean? I'm sure they are. Maybe I'm not aware of them. But what really power do I have to do anything about it? You know what I mean? Like, what? And I guess that's where activism comes in. Like, does that mean if you're not out actively campaigning against change, then you must support the system as it is?
It's kind of like the whole all it takes for evil to win is for good men to sit by and do nothing.
Right.
Like, we don't, if we want to be good men, if white people were 10% of the population and we knew that we got fucked over tax time every year, right? And we spoke up about it and we're like, you're fucking us over every year, right? But there's only 10% of us. 9 out of 10 people are benefiting from the fact that we get fucked over. Okay, real quick. 9 out of 10 people are benefiting from the fact that we get fucked over. So our 1 in 10 voice will never outvote them by itself. We'll never be able to change it. So if some of those 9 don't say, you know what, it's fucked up how we're treating them white people over there, we better do something about this. If they don't stand up and change it, who does? Nobody. We can just get fucked over forever. Like, we have to have allies on the other side, or the minority can never outvote the majority. It's impossible. And if the majority's benefiting, why are they going to change it unless they care? And so that's where it's our responsibility.
Well, and I think...
Yeah, go through.
I think, though, like, I agree with most of that. I would say, look at a different... Again, if we get this out of specific subjects of race, let's look at, like, something like child abuse, sexual child abuse, for example.
Oh, God.
Everybody you ever talk to says the fucking punishments are too short, and it's insane that these people are ever let out of jail. But yet, nothing changes on that front. So does that mean everyone is complicit in child sexual abuse? Because obviously it's rampant in this fucking community, and it's rampant all over the place, and yet average sentences are something like ridiculous, like 6 months or something for like a child sexual assault. It's fucking ridiculous. So are we all complicit in that? Does that make all of us sexual abusers because we don't do something to change that? You know?
I mean...
And that's one that transcends race or gender or any of that.
If you think it's wrong, then why aren't you doing nothing about it? Is my question.
Yeah, I don't know. Feel powerless? I mean, I guess that would be the short answer, but...
Do 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 do. Longest break ever. It's such a long break. Oh well. It's good stuff. My turn. came up with the idea of lemon hand soap?
Yeah.
Awful. What are you looking for?
Jerry was like, "Can I get the work they did on that back wall?" He's like, "It's fucking terrible," which I don't know what he's talking about.
Oh, that's the fire pit. That's cool.
Yeah, I guess that's where they're doing outside meetings.
How far back is their property? There's like a roof back there.
It goes back to that water. There's water back there, like a pond, part of the creek, I think. Jen calls it a pond. I think it's part of the creek, but maybe not.
And that's cool.
Yeah, and I guess she says you can fish back there. I guess that's part of this property.
Like hiking trails back there? How much woods is that?
Yeah, I don't know. Not that much, because there's an industrial park just on the other side.
That's where I drive down.
Yeah. Blue Ball Road. Triumph Industrial Park.
I know. I always think it says Trump, and I'm like, Trump Industrial Park. Man, way off topic. So I don't know.
It's fun though. Jen won't talk to me about this stuff. She gets all fucking weird.
So we don't want to get into any of the sponsorship. What is a sponsor? Who needs a sponsor? I got the old sponsorship guide.
Oh yeah, we can talk about all that stuff.
I'm like, God, it's gonna take too long. There's too much in it. Fuck it, we'll just jump into it and go. I wish I could pull up the old and the new together. Do you have the new one?
Oh, I can find it real quick.
I can send it to you or share it with you. I have your Gmail, don't I? Apparently not. What's your Gmail?
bturk05@gmail.com.
Turk05.
Why wouldn't you search it using Google? Here, I got it.
Yeah. Figures. You got the new one, right?
Yeah.
So it's broken down the same way, isn't it? Into like who, what.
This is the new one. Yeah, who is a sponsor?
Who,
what does a sponsor do?
Okay.
What
And
does a
then I'll look at the
sponsee
old
do?
one.
How do we get a sponsor?
Yeah, so it's got similar.
Yeah, this is the one I read this morning.
Okay. You ready? So we'll go through like the old one and the new one together and see what they say. All right, so here we are. We're back. We're going to go from here. So in NA, there was a pamphlet called Sponsorship, and then at some point in time, they decided to rewrite that. And so I have the old version. Billy has the new version, and we're going to kind of go through it and see what we can gather, if we like the changes, if we think the information's spot on. And so this one starts out talking about it's, based on the collective experiences, answers some of the most commonly asked questions. It's got essential information, but it's not meant to be comprehensive. Sponsorship is the heart of the NA way of recovery from addiction. One addict helping another. Sponsorship's a two-way street, helping both the newcomer and the old-timer alike, which is an interesting statement. We kind of talked to Billy before all this started, and if you listen to the YouTube version of this, you probably heard a lot of it, that sponsorship seems to always be referred to as for the newcomer. And that statement kind of reinforces that. It's a two-way street. It helps the newcomer and the old-timer. What about the old-timer and the older-timer, right?
Right.
Like, they don't ever mention that. So what's up with that? Do they not think we need sponsors?
I don't know. It's always been explained to me that I should always have a sponsor. I mean, that's been the general rule of thumb that I understood from my predecessors. And I did find a little passage in the AA pamphlet about sponsorship that says, it doesn't say specifically that anyone needs a sponsor, but it does say in there that, members with long amounts of time for continued recovery should maintain a sponsor relationship. So that is maybe more subtly in there than I think it should be.
Yeah.
But it is there.
They definitely, when they said, if you don't have a sponsor, you're sponsored by an idiot. That never says, unless you're an old timer when you're a fucking genius. Like, that's what? I need a sponsor. I'm crazy.
Yeah, I think I always need a sponsor.
So the old version starts off with, what is a sponsor? A sponsor is a recovering addict in the program of Narcotics Anonymous, obviously whatever program you're in, I guess. Someone we can trust to share our life experiences with, both good and bad. A person to whom we can go with our problems that may be too personal to share with the group. It is suggested that a sponsor be someone who has practiced in working the 12 steps and is involved in the program. Primarily, a sponsor is a guide through the 12 steps of recovery. So that is probably where you got your information, that they are primarily a guide through the 12 steps.
And that's what that was the pamphlet that was around when I first got it. I think 2004, I think, is when the new one came out. So, yeah, and this one's, it's similar. It's just, and I hate to say it's a little more wishy-washy. That's always seems to be the way. Just what I was thinking. It's like not as sort of clear-cut and direct. It says, sponsorship is a personal and private relationship that can mean different things to different people. For the purpose of this pamphlet, an NA sponsor is a member of Narcotics Anonymous living our program of recovery who is willing to build a special, supportive, one-on-one relationship with us. Most members think of a sponsor first and foremost as someone who can help us work the 12 steps of NA and sometimes the 12 traditions and concepts. A sponsor is not necessarily a friend, but maybe someone in whom we can confide. We can share things with our sponsor that we might not be comfortable sharing at meetings. So again, it just seems a little less pointed.
Right. Right. But I generally agree with the information. I think it's somebody we confide in, somebody we take stuff to that we might not be able to share at the group level, and definitely, primarily someone who guides us through the 12 steps. I buy into all that right there.
Yeah. And it's funny because I used to feel like that was my only responsibility, and the truth is, if I look back on it, I think in my benefits from a sponsor and my benefits with Sponsee have mostly been, like, the biggest benefits have come in the dealing with life on life's terms stuff and learning how to apply these principles. I mean, so much of it is, how do I figure out what my values are in this new situation in my life, whether it's at my job or with my wife or with my kids, and how do I apply this stuff in my life? And it's not always about, how do I not get high, or, the obvious shit. It's about, all right, I want to be loving, caring, and supportive of my kid, but they're doing this really fucking stupid thing over here, and I don't know how to navigate this, and maybe what would you,
Right.
Like, those are the areas that sponsorship has helped me out the most.
I just had a really interesting interaction with a guy on Instagram a couple weeks back where he was like, sponsor and the steps and all that, and I just, like his comment, sure, whatever, fuck a sponsor and steps, I don't care. And then he asked me to go deeper. Like, he dug for more information. I'm like, do you really fucking want this, buddy? Like, I don't. It's not what I want to do with my day. But he did. He wanted it. So I, just gave him what I knew, which is, a sponsor is a guy reading from a later page in the instruction manual, right? He can look back and say, hey, when you're doing those 4 screws in the bottom of that chair on step 4, that fucking really matters that you get that right, because on step 22, I found out I had the leg upside down when I fucking did it, and then it didn't work out because the hole was in the wrong place. And it's just like one of those things. It's just a guy reading from a later page that has been through some shit. And I'm like, this is how I see it being beneficial, right? It's not that they're better than me or anything. And it was interesting. I still don't think he bought in, right? But I was like, I don't know. I didn't even want to go there.
Well, and that gets into that. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like the heart of the, like, power greater than me or power outside of me. Like, I need someone else to help me do this shit. And a sponsor, somebody who typically you would hope that you respect their opinion, that you admire, their insights.
Right, and so that's one of the things I heard when I got here was, how do you find a sponsor? Well, find somebody that has what you want, right? And they've always displayed that from where I'm from, in different ways. Hey, it could be somebody who spiritually acts in a nicer way to the people around them, or it could be a guy who, dresses in a nice suit with alligator skin shoes and a fancy ass car. Like, whatever it is you want, go to that person and ask them how they got it. Like, that's how you get sponsored.
That's exactly what I heard, is look for the person who's got what you want.
Yeah. So the next section in this one is who needs a sponsor, and I don't think that's in the new version, is it? Is there any section like that? Who needs a sponsor? Yeah, see, they took that out. They didn't want to hurt people's feelings.
Not at all.
Okay, well, first line of this is interesting as fuck. It is our experience that most addicts need a sponsor. What? Most who? All motherfuckers, not most. Weird, I don't know. So that's what they say. It is our experience most addicts need a sponsor. At times, we all find ourselves on shaky ground, confused, in emotional pain, and in need of a helping hand. Since we rarely trusted others, we attempted to go it alone in life. This became one of our problems. We are people who have never learned how to live. This is where our sponsor comes in. Our sponsors help by sharing their experience, strength, and hope. To sum it up, anyone who may have the desire to stay clean and begin to recover should have a sponsor. Woo! So they say most, but then they come around to the end. If you want any chance of fucking recovery, asshole, you better get a sponsor.
Yeah. I think it's like most things. In the program, we try to use this suggestive language that these are suggestions and all that, but most people will tell you this is what you fucking need to do.
Right.
And you can take it as a suggestion or you can go get high.
I've never actually looked this up, which is a shame because I have Google in my hands right this second. But they said that suggestion, one of the definitions of that is a subtle command. Yeah. And so it's like, so you don't have that section. What about how do I get a sponsor? Is that in there?
Nope.
No? They don't have the how do I get a sponsor?
Oh, yes, we do. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
That is down here later. It's not next, though. There's some other things first, so it's down here a little further.
What do you got? What is a sponsor?
What does a sponsee do?
Oh.
What does a sponsor do?
Interesting. So, I don't... Okay, let's just go with the how do I get a sponsor section. It says listening is the key to finding a sponsor. Interesting. The most obvious place to look for a sponsor is at NA meetings. Talk, share, and listen to members. Get plenty of phone numbers and use them. When you find someone with who you can talk openly and relate, simply ask that person to be your sponsor. Chances are the answer will be yes. Sometimes the person may be unable to sponsor you. Keep on trying. Remember that when one door closes, another will open. Another cliche. Continue to attend meetings, listen, and soon you will find a sponsor. It'll magically happen. What do you think about that? The key is listening.
I'm just reading through what this one says. It's way too long. But yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, again, what I know now of my sponsee relationships being on both ends is they generally work better with people that I communicate well with, that we get along, that we have similarities, yeah. That we have life similarities. Yeah,
I was going to let it go.
Yeah. That we have like similarities in life, you know what I mean? Like I have more experience with, having a more professional career and raising a family and, being in a long-term monogamous relationship. Those are areas that I have experience with. There are going to be things that I don't have as much experience with. You know what I mean? I've always been pretty stable. I think we bought our house when I had like 2 years clean. I've been just financially stable and had, a lot of stability in my life. I haven't had a lot of trauma and things since I've been clean.
So you might not have as easy time or as much to offer experience-wise if, say, somebody wanted you to sponsor them and they switch jobs twice a year for the most part, or weren't married and got in new relationships every year or every other year. Like, you wouldn't have as much experience to say, oh, well, this is, how that worked for me. Or
right. Like, it would be hard for me to be really empathetic or have good advice for someone who's, like, dating in recovery. Because I never really did that. You know what I mean? Like, I met my wife now. I had a couple months clean, and I knew her before I got clean even. So, we had already known each other. And so I've never really done a lot of dating in recovery with people in or out of the program.
Right.
I've only had a few jobs. I went from the job that I had the whole time I was using to the job that I'm at now. And that's been, pretty much it. So, I had a few minor things there in between.
So job applications and resumes aren't going to be your forte.
Yeah, that's not.
Gotcha. So the next section on this is what length of clean time should a sponsor have, which I think is interesting. Like, I don't think that's addressed in the other one at all, out of doubt.
No.
This one says it just varies from person to person. maybe a member with years of clean time, or maybe only a few months. Clean time and experience depends on the availability of sponsors in your area. That's for absolute sure. Just speaking about differences of areas, we had somebody talking to us on Instagram who is like what you talk about, lives in an area where there is only AA. NA has zero presence whatsoever. And I'm just still baffled and shocked by this, that we don't have, like, is there no acceptance of drug addicts in that area? Or is it just that the NA program never got started? I don't understand. Like, it's 2020. Yeah. We got drug addicts. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and when we were up in New England, this just reminded me of this. I forgot about this. Up there, they would have a thing that they called flat book meetings, where you would go in and do the step working guide. They would do it like in the meeting, during the meeting, and that was how they worked steps. It was almost like group sponsorship, which is something that might come up if we have enough time.
Right.
But it was this idea of the group actually sponsoring someone through the steps, because what we were told was up there was this huge influx of young people, new people, because of the opioid epidemic, and they didn't have enough experienced members to sponsor all these people. That, they just didn't have enough experienced members to handle the load. So they were doing it as a group.
That's a creative, way to tackle that problem. I feel like Baltimore and Dundalk and maybe like Glen Burnie, those areas could use that kind of method. Yeah. They need to do something. What they're doing don't seem to be working.
Right.
So this talks about the availability in your area. This is interesting, and they would never put this in literature today. It says the quality of clean time is more important than the quantity of clean time. But don't judge your neighbors. Choose someone that has a firm grasp on the 12 suggested steps of recovery of NA. Are there not suggested steps? What the fuck are the 12 suggested steps? Choose someone that has a firm grasp of the 12 steps, seems reasonably happy, and has the willingness to help other recovering addicts. We call people like this winners, and it is a good idea to find your sponsor among these recovering addicts. Well, there you fucking go. There's a definition of winners. I didn't even know it had one.
But it judging the fuck out of people.
Yeah. So if you're reasonably happy, apparently if you struggle with depression, you're not a fucking winner. And if you don't have the willingness to help people, you're not a winner. Yeah. Who the fuck? Should a sponsor be a friend? Our experience has shown a good sponsor relationship need not be based on friendships, but trust is vital. When looking for sponsors, consider experiences in life, quality of clean time, availability to us, and willingness to help. Yeah, that didn't help at all. That's fucking useless. Should my sponsor be a man or a woman? Does it talk about this in there?
In this one?
Yeah.
Let's see.
This is interesting. This is definitely, this is, I think, from 1983 as well. So this was a whole different world when they were writing this. I don't want anybody to be confused by this next sentence I read. Because this says, it is strongly suggested we find a sponsor of the same sex. Experience has shown us that members of the same sex better understand certain issues, such as sexuality, family or identity problems, relationship problems, etc. We are emotionally unstable, and it is easy to form emotional bonds with members of the opposite sex. This detracts from our program and could spell disaster, especially for the newcomer. Woo! You will not find that in 2020. That is for daggone sure. It's actually one of the points I wanted to bring up. How do you feel about sponsorship at this point? Is it men with the men, women with the women still?
I don't think that is in the new pamphlet.
No way.
And I will say, in fairness, I didn't think that was a concept that was practiced in AA, but apparently it is. It's in their pamphlet I read, 15 questions about sponsorship or whatever. They make the same strong recommendations on similar characteristics. They do also address, though, that, a homosexual person may get a sponsor of the same sex.
Oh, they address
for similar. Yeah, they say it right in there for similar reasons as to what it outlined with the emotional thing, and that's my opinion. Is you get into a lot of intimacy and emotional vulnerability, and those things. And if you couple that with someone and they talk about, I think specifically, like you shouldn't get someone that you have a physical attraction to. That maybe is a criteria that can push it into a dangerous area. Right. But then, I don't know. If you aren't shallow as fuck, maybe looks don't matter. I don't know.
So this is interesting for the LGBTQ community, for sure. In this day and age, like, how do you navigate this? How do you find the right sponsor? What if you're interested in all, parties that are around? Like, how do you eliminate that from being a concern on your list? Like, that gets tricky. And even trickier when, okay, maybe the sponsee might be homosexual, but the sponsor is of the same sex but isn't. Yeah. And then it's really, really tricky. Like, I don't know what's right. And the other topic I wanted to bring up around that with you to see your thoughts on is, how does that work in other fellowships? Like, okay, in NA, there's a wealth of people, and we're here about drugs, so maybe I could help a woman with her, addiction issue. But what about in places like Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, where it's all about that sex and love and dependency relationship type stuff? Like, how do you work that out? How do you get a sponsor that maybe, and there's not as many sponsors available, so you're stuck with what's around, and it's like, that gets tricky. So is this like a hard rule, or is this just if you can?
Yeah, that I don't even pretend to know. I know for me personally, like, I wouldn't sponsor women. I just wouldn't. Now, I've had a sponsor that he may even currently sponsor women, but he has and does sponsor women if they would ask. He's done it. I don't, mostly because it's not an area I want to go. You know what I mean? For myself or for them.
Right.
Am I limiting myself for my experience? I don't know, maybe. But it's like, I got to balance these out, risk reward, sort of thing. And at this point, sort of, my wife has had a lot of men ask her to sponsor them because she's been around so long, and she really does have a great grasp and explanation and understanding of the program. And she always tells them no, because there's not a shortage of men. And you know what I mean? There's not a shortage of quality men to ask in our area. If there was, she said she might change her mind. But there's not. There's plenty of men out there to ask. So, we happen to be lucky enough to be in a position where you can do that fairly easily.
Right. And I've been at meetings of other programs where, there's 7 people there every week. And that's what you got for the area. And one has any kind of freedom from whatever the manifestation is in that program. And it's like, what do I do here? I'm stuck with this one thing. Does it mention that at all in the newer pamphlet? I would be surprised if it doesn't.
Mention what about?
About the men
sex?
Or women, yeah.
No, I couldn't find it in there.
No? Oh, man. So they're just wide open about that now. They don't have any opinion on it anymore.
Yeah.
Here's another question I was actually going to bring up. I'm surprised this addresses so many of these. Should we have more than one sponsor? What's your opinion on this?
In like NA, I would say no. I think you should only have one. If you're in different fellowships, I don't know, maybe. It would depend. It would kind of be one of those things where my approach would be personally to talk to the individual. Depends on the fellowship, what they're doing there, how they're using each of us. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't want to feel like I was being put in some, whatever you call it, like conflicting situation with someone. Well, I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to ask them, and see what you guys,
pitch you against each other.
Compare your answer. Yeah, like, I wouldn't like that. But if it was an area, like, say, like the Sex and Love Anonymous, or maybe food or gambling, like, I don't have that experience. Yes, addiction is similar, but there's different things that come along with that I can't pretend to understand.
And so I was like completely, I don't want to say against it. I just being raised the NA way, right? Like, this is the right way. It was one sponsor. You got one sponsor, right? Which is exactly what this pamphlet is about to say. It says, should we have more than one sponsor? First sentence, we think not, right? And so I was all in that. So when I explored some of these other programs, I was like, damn, I need to find a sponsor who is also in all these other programs that I go to and NA. Right. And then they can just be my sponsor for everything all at once. One person, right? And the more I evaluated this, the more it was like, you know what? Why can't I have a fucking Jedi council of sponsors, right? Like, what is a sponsor to me? And so in working steps out of a book called The Gentle Path, through the 12 steps, it talks about having guides, plural, right? And that's what I consider my sponsor, kind of a guide in life, right? And in my program. And so why can't I have a few guides? And the one thing I've come up with, I think you need to have an opposite number, right? Because then you can have like
so you can
best
have
of 7, right? You guys can vote, and it doesn't come out as a stalemate ever.
So, and it was interesting. Now this goes back. The new one doesn't have this in there, and I believe the newer AA one that I read says it should be one person. But in this old one from 1944, I think it was, it talks about co-sponsorship in here. And you may find co-sponsorship beneficial. I was like, wow, co-sponsorship. That's fucking incredible.
Well, that ties into the whole, sponsorship by group idea that we were talking about. This says our experience has shown that it's easier to receive direction from one individual. We find it easier to trust in one person rather than many. One sponsor, we can build a relationship. I don't know about that. I don't know about the confining yourself to... Then you're only getting one take on things, right? What if the one sponsor I got doesn't know the information I need to hear? I mean, obviously we trust that God will make sure that happens, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't believe they actually said that.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been in that situation, so I had probably, my sponsor was, my closest friend and person I was closest with in recovery, and when he kind of left and relapsed, like, I wasn't sure I wanted to stick around going to NA really for a while, just, like, that relationship was probably the biggest part of why I came for a few years, and
wow.
Yeah. And when he was not there, it was like, well, fuck. And so, yeah, it's dangerous only having one person.
Yeah, I agree. I think have as many guides as there are. Now, obviously, we run into the danger of, cherry picking the responses we get. Like I got 12 guides, and, I'll ask the one who I know cheats on his girl if I can cheat on mine, so...
But see, I encourage people to do that anyway most of the time, and that falls back on, like, when I say sponsor, like, my sponsor's, responsibility is to guide me through the steps, not be my marriage counselor, social worker, financial advisor, all those things.
Right.
I can get that information from other people, and I can use him as a resource for those things, but my sponsor's primary job is to work with me through the steps. At least that's been my perspective up till now, and then to look at his life experience and see what areas he may have something to offer, because my sponsors haven't always, they're human beings too. They're not perfect people. They don't have everything in their life figured out.
Right.
You know what I mean?
No, yeah, it's very true. I mean, and this says, how do we use a sponsor? That's the next section in here. How do we use a sponsor? Communication is the key in this relationship. When we have questions about any part of our program, we can look to our sponsor, but it is our responsibility to get in touch with them during these times. Here's that hole they need to reach out to us. Whether it be by telephone or in person, we share our problems. Good or bad, we try to share our experiences on a daily basis. Oh, shit. I've definitely been doing it wrong. I don't know if I want anybody calling me on a daily basis either. Oh, my God. Here it goes, too, Billy. Day or night, whenever we feel the need, we contact our sponsor. It is important that we... Yeah, I don't know. It's important that we be honest with our sponsor, listen with an open mind to suggestions, and are willing to try a way other than our own. Remember, we need never be alone. Bro, I don't think I can talk to people on a daily basis all the time.
Yeah.
I really don't.
I don't
especially
know if I could either.
Whenever. Does it talk about how to use a sponsor in that?
Well, they have two sections. What does a sponsor do, and what does a sponsee do?
Read the sponsee part.
The sponsee part?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's read. What does a sponsee do? One suggestion is to have regular contact with our sponsor. In addition to phoning our sponsor, we can arrange to meet up at meetings. Some sponsors will tell us how often they expect us to contact them, while others don't set those kind of requirements. If we cannot find a sponsor who lives close to us, we can look to technology or mail to keep in touch.
Mail.
Regardless of how we communicate with our sponsor, it is important that we be honest and that we listen with an open mind. Now here comes one of their cool quotes. They do this thing where they quote someone.
Oh, boy.
I rely on my sponsor to give me general direction and a new perspective. If nothing else, she's an important sounding board. Sometimes all it takes is saying something out loud to someone else for me to see things differently. And then there's a little bit more. We may worry that we are a burden to our sponsor and hesitate to contact them. Or we may believe our sponsor will want something in return from us. But the truth is, our sponsors benefit as much as we do from the relationship. In our program, we believe that we can only keep what we have by giving it away. By using our sponsor, we are actually helping them to stay clean and recover.
Yeah. So I kind of agree with that. Maybe the whole way this works is that people with like 18 months to 4 years sponsor newer members, and then they have the availability in their lives. And then when you get old and crotchety and don't have time anymore, you just sponsor people who don't need as much from you. I don't know. I can't imagine somebody calling me every day. I really can't. Like, that would be rough right at this moment.
Well, and the truth is, it's difficult to try to sponsor someone who's brand new in recovery. I mean, I've found, for me personally,
further removed
a lot of time. Yeah, I'm just so far removed from that stuff. And I try, and it's like, let me try to think back onto the struggles of what that felt like. You know what I mean?
It's like trying to parent a teenager.
Right.
And remember what it was like to be a teenager.
Yeah,
it's like,
and it's, just like we talk about, like how, like I can vaguely remember how daunting it was to ask someone to be my sponsor, figure out how I was going to go to meetings every day. But now it's almost like a joke. Like I almost laugh at it. Like I can't really feel that feeling anymore. Right. But at the time, that was like anxiety.
Oh my God.
Driving shit. Like, oh my God, there he is. Am I going to do it today? I don't know. I might have to wait. I don't know if I can do it today, man. Right. Maybe I'll see him tomorrow. Yeah, I'll wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a better day. And blow it all. Like that much anxiety over that thing.
Right.
And, it's hard to fucking remember how weird that is.
The next section in here is how to be a sponsor. You said that's in yours too? This section is extremely fucking long. I'm not reading all this. There's no way.
There's not how to be. That's in the AA one.
It doesn't say how to be a sponsor in there? I thought that was
it says, what's the role of the sponsor?
Oh, what's the role?
Or what does a sponsor do? That's what it says.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This says it's an important step to become a sponsor, should not be taken lightly. Believe it ever possible. Consult our own sponsor before agreeing to sponsor someone else. Hey, I've done that. In order to arrive at this, we might wish to explore our motives. Are we considering sponsorship to look good amongst the fellowship? I should have read this. I was obviously doing it wrong. Or to help the addict who still suffers. Remember, we only keep what we have by giving it away. Am I ready to become a sponsor? Am I willing to share my experience, strength, and hope? Am I willing to make a commitment? After we decide to, where do we go? Realize that our own recovery comes first. Basic purpose of sponsorship is to help the addict through the 12 steps. Increasingly obvious to us that the best way to do this is by example. Sponsorship is an extension of our own personal program recovery. One of the most difficult aspects of sponsorship is drawing the line between caring and enabling. We feel it is enabling them when we work their program for them. It doesn't help addicts if their sponsors are overprotective. Sometimes tough love is essential. We suggest you keep in mind it is our responsibility to carry the message, not the addict. We are not reformers, preachers of the gospel, welfare workers, part-time social workers, marriage counselors, money lenders, employment counselors, or parole officers. It is important to remember that we are also suffering addicts. May come a time when you are unable to relate to the person you sponsor. At this time, you may direct them to someone who may help. Damn! We talk about firing people.
Yeah.
We need not feel guilty if someone we sponsor relapses. We are all responsible for our own recovery. There will be times when we won't have the answers. It is our responsibility to seek these answers out with the people we sponsor. We are not God. Well then, that addresses a whole lot of stuff. So you, I believe, don't believe in firing people. I know we've had this discussion so much.
I don't know if it... So I would say I don't generally fire people because they don't do work or don't call. The way they described it there was almost like if we have a real differences of opinion, or I mean that's the way I took it out of that. Maybe
what did it say? We can no longer relate to the person?
We can no longer relate, where it's like if you're talking about applying principles in a way that I don't really understand, or I'm explaining them to you in a way that you don't understand, I don't know that my help is going to be that beneficial. Or if you just have some values in your life that are completely different from mine, and we can't relate on that, Like I would say, if I knew someone was probably overly, I shouldn't use the word overly. If I knew someone was Christian or involved with a church or very much involved in an organized religion, I probably wouldn't be a good fit for them. Really? I don't know that I would fire them, though. I don't know.
I can't imagine you don't think you'd be a good fit for them.
Yeah?
Yeah. I don't see how anything... I don't think anything that someone living or attempting to live a spiritual path, I don't see how that's ever going to be contrary to a religion. Are you going to also buy into their concept of God and how to be saved and go to heaven? No, but I don't think anything you say is going to be offensive to what they say. Like, yeah, hey, let's treat people well. Okay, sounds great. That's what Jesus said too. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, I would be honest.
Right.
If it just went there, I would try to keep my opinion to myself. But
honesty without compassion is abuse.
And again, I don't know if I would fire them, but I would definitely put that disclaimer. And I say that because I did sponsor a guy that was religious, and it was weird. It was pretty weird.
And so the times when
it was difficult.
I was fired by a sponsor in a different program at one point, and I was highly offended by it because I didn't like it, and he was supposed to help me and blah, 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 blah. And my therapist at the time was like, look, even as a therapist, if I feel that the person is no longer growing in our relationship together, I'm going to push them to somebody else. She's like, I'm not doing them any good to let them sit here and be stagnant with me. I'm just co-signing that it's okay to be there.
Yeah.
And I don't
that
believe
sounds really healthy. Yeah, and my wife has said that, a very similar thing too, She said a very similar thing.
I would say, so even if I have a sponsee, maybe we don't not get along or not have a huge difference of opinion like you were referring to, but if they don't call me and we don't work steps together, we're not relating. Right. So we obviously are having trouble relating somehow. So maybe I do need to tell them, like, hey... And I'll say, self-centeredly, a lot of the times when I have that conversation, it's because I don't want to have to show up at their anniversary and either make up bullshit or say the truth, which is, hey, you haven't done anything for the last year. So I like to preemptively have that conversation like, hey, you're not working steps and I don't really feel like your sponsor. What should we do about this? Like, let's address this together. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Do you...
I'm sitting here second guessing myself, so I don't know.
I mean, do you show up and give people their medallion and just say kind things, or?
I mean, I say the truth. I don't think I would say anything that's not the truth.
Right.
I don't make shit up or blow smoke up their ass.
Okay. It's just hard because
but
it's
I've been that, and it is awkward.
Yeah. Well, I try to say the truth too, but I've said it's so hard to say, hey, I really have high hopes that you get more involved in step work this next year. It's like supposed to be a celebration, and I feel like a downer when I'm like coming in at the end like, yay, you got clean time, but let's hope you actually do some work in the future because you're not like, that just feels like such a shitty thing to do, and I don't want to. But I also don't want to be fake and be like, oh, it's so great.
Well, and again, this is one of those like judgments, and I make it too, but is doing work, does that only count as formally writing on steps, or is there work we can do in other areas? And again, that depends too, like what are people doing in their lives?
I would say there's work that can be done all over for me. At least I believe that. But generally, if I'm not making the conscious, regular effort to write about my life, I'm probably not going in the, walking up the down escalator direction. Like, usually I'm getting a little stagnant. And it might be slower at some times than others, depending on how much work I'm doing. But I got to do some kind of self-reflection, or I'm not...
No, maybe you're only working on outside shit.
Yeah,
is that necessarily terrible?
I
mean, for me it is. Don't get me wrong. Like,
for my spiritual condition, yes.
For my spiritual condition, it's not good.
Yeah, I might make lots of money and like take nice vacations that year. Who knows, right? But yeah, for my spiritual situation.
Yeah, and there is a weird thing with and sponsorship plays into this of like, is the guy that comes around for 20 plus years and hasn't really worked the steps, but has what on the outside would appear as a good life, like, is that person really working the program or not? I don't know. There's been a lot of time where I've said no,
right.
Where I've felt pretty wholeheartedly no, but then I've seen plenty of people come in and work the steps and not stick around and go get high. So, is the guy that sticks around for 20 years and doesn't work any steps and slowly makes whatever, incremental maybe, if any, improvements in their life? I don't know. Again, it's a judgment that, I at times have made that I feel less privileged to make now.
Well, the old sponsorship pamphlet says they are not generally happy, so they are not one of the winners.
And their quality sucks.
Right.
Yeah, they're not winners.
I guess they're losers. It doesn't say that, but I guess they're losers. So one of the things in that conversation with the gentleman on Instagram, I think his name was Droog or something like that, he was talking about not writing a step for some other flawed individual to read. Like, that was his initial reaction to the post, that I kind of was like, that's not how I see it, right? But okay. And so not writing a step for some other flawed individual to read. And it just made me wonder, like, do people even know how this generally works? Because my sponsor has never once read my step. Like, we go over it together. I read what the fuck I wrote. Nobody else ever reads it. I've never once handed my step to a sponsor and they read it. Like, that's
not only that, who do they got that's not flawed in their life? I mean, therapists, counselors, priests, all those fucking people are flawed too.
That's a good point. And I never did get down to like, hey, who's your guide? And so that's kind of for the people who aren't in the fellowship. I look at this, even in the fellowship, as my sponsor is a guide in life. It's like a mentor kind of thing, right? It's that situation. And I think anything we go into in life, people find a mentor, right? If you're an artist, you probably found an art teacher in your college that you really liked that became your mentor. Or if you're, a business person and went into business, you aspire to be like this one business person that teaches courses on how to successfully run businesses, and they've opened up a lot of businesses. Or, I know my therapist friends all have people they aspire to be. They love Brene Brown. They love Yalom because he's great with group work. They love, all these different names. It's like we all have these kind of mentor guide figures in our life. It's not a strange concept. We just call them a sponsor in a 12-step recovery community, and they happen to know about recovery, not business or art or therapy.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, for me, my sponsors have never been like gurus or whatever. They've never been like the end all be all of the direction of my life. They've just been people that I've been able to go to and talk to about maybe issues I have going on, someone that I can share with, someone that I can relate with. Maybe they have some insights and some guidance or some things I could try. But it's not been like a case where it's like I just go ask what I should do. They tell me what I should do and I just go do that. They've just been another like helping hand along the way of this process. For me, and I usually try to explain this to people, like in sponsorship, like I am just guiding someone along their path. You know what I mean? Like recovery is their path. I'm not leading them on my path because my path might not be for them.
Right.
I'm helping them just stay on their path and sort of keep them from going way off course and shooting off the mountain. But the road they go on is theirs. And with that, I feel like two things happen. One, I don't really get to necessarily take credit for their successes because they're the ones doing all the work. All I'm doing 90% of the time is showing up and listening and trying to be compassionate. And it does help me a lot. And two, I don't have to take responsibility for their failures. You know what I mean? If I have a sponsee that comes in, doesn't do what they need to do, doesn't put the work in to change, and then goes out and relapses, I mean, I feel bad for them, but I don't feel responsible for them. If they don't do the work, it's not my responsibility to make them do it,
Right.
So
right.
They reap the benefits of their action. They get all the praise and reward, but they also get all the responsibility too.
See, I take that same idea into sharing a meeting. And like when it's a great fucking meeting, I don't take any credit for it. I'm like, oh, I prayed, that was God speaking through me, thank God, it's all him. And that way when I bomb, fuck it, God sucked tonight, it's not my fault, right? Like, I don't get to take any credit for that. So I don't know, that's interesting though. I guess I'm just a little blown away that people aren't familiar with the idea of having a guide or mentor in their life. Like, who doesn't have that? And if you don't, maybe that's something to evaluate, honestly. Like, I've tried to look for outside of NA. I've tried to look into having a mentor type person in the rest of my life too at different times, and it's harder than you realize to reach out to people and have them sign up for this position, right? Because people are busy, and it's very interesting. It's almost like in medieval times, like this is how trades worked, right? Like you wanted to become a smith, and so you apprenticed underneath somebody, and you learned from them until you honed your craft and you got better. And I think that's how like every trade should kind of work, and we should all do that in our business. Oh, you're a teacher? Find a teacher that fucking you really respect the way they do things and learn from them. Or you're a doctor? Do the same thing. And in recovery, do the same thing. Find somebody that you really respect how they live their life and try to emulate that.
Right. And if you're new in recovery or a family member, like understand like all that sponsor is to help them in this recovery program part of their life. You know what I mean? That sponsor can't necessarily help them find a job or help them get an apartment, or maybe they do, maybe they don't, but that's not really what their primary role is.
Right.
Their primary role is just to kind of help them find their way through this, whatever the recovery program is, whether it's NA or AA or one of the other programs. Like the sponsor really, that should be their lane. You know what I mean? Like their lane is probably best suited to that program, not all aspects of the person's life. So if you're just getting out of treatment, or you have a loved one that's getting out of treatment, your sponsor isn't the one you should be expecting to come pick you up and take you to meetings and give you money when you need it and take you out to eat and make sure you get a job. Like it's not a sponsorship in a financial way or in those kind of ways.
So I think the interesting other side of that is if you are a family member or somebody that struggles with a family member that struggles with addiction, that you can go get a sponsor yourself and find out how to be good at that, right? You want to know how to be a good supportive family member that's not an enabler but still loves and supports somebody in the best way. There's places to go for that. There's obviously Al-Anon and Nar-Anon are the big two that stick out to me. I know there's some sort of fellowship or program for family members or people, loved ones of people who struggle with sex addiction. I know that's out there. I don't know the exact name of it or where it's located. I have heard of it before though. It does exist. And there's also local community groups. We have Maryland Coalition of Families nearby us that has people that have information about how to support these loved ones who are struggling. And so if you want, to find mentorship on how to be a better person like that, that's out there too. And I think that's hugely useful and beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, in the one AA pamphlet I read, I think it was 15 questions about sponsorship, they talk specifically about that the sponsor's role is to talk to family, or part of that role is to talk to family members and reach out to the family members if it's applicable and explain what the program is and what's going on, and maybe some resources for the family, connected to these other programs, the Al-Anon or Alateen, and let them know what other resources are out there for them, but also what's involved with the program itself. I've heard all kinds of funny stories about people telling their families, all kinds of shit. Oh, the program tells me, I got to pay these dues. So, Mom, you need to give me $20 a week because I got to pay $20 a week to be a part of the fellowship.
Oh, yeah.
Or, I need to go out to these events and we're going to be out till 1 or 2 in the morning, at least 2 or 3 days a week, like shit like that. That isn't really true,
Right.
It's just stories they make up. So, I don't know. Interesting. I never heard that in Narcotics Anonymous. I've never heard that presented that way, but
I was definitely, at one point in time before I ever got here, I was getting money from my parents to go to bowling and shit with all y'all crazy addicts, and I was definitely just using that to get high with. So,
I mean, as a sponsor, I've heard of that happening. I've never heard of a sponsor, like, I've never felt as a sponsor my responsibility should be to talk to a spouse or a family member of someone that I sponsored.
I think it's interesting in just the different dynamics of all the different people I've sponsored. Like, it's never the same. There's no two sponsorship relationships I've had with sponsees that has been the same. Like, over time, they've all been just a little different or a lot different, right? Yeah. Some people I do end up meeting their families, and I go to, family surprise birthday parties and shit like that. Like, that has happened. I know some people's children, right? Some people, I know them because I see them at the meeting and we go over steps together, and I don't ever get introduced to their families. And, like, none of that's wrong, I don't think. It's all just how the bond forms, depending.
Yeah, and I've definitely got to know people's families over the years. I guess I was more specifically the way they word it, at least in the AA one, is like for a brand new person coming in.
Seek them out.
Like you would then go, hey, let me go meet your spouse and your family so that I can tell them what we're doing and what's going on with this program, and maybe some resources for them as like a early, I don't want to call it intervention, but like an early step, in the recovery process.
It is interesting for sure. Yeah.
I've only ever met family members, like, say, over time, you build a relationship. They know you've been friends for a while, so they might invite you to a thing or a party or a, whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely. I've never sought out anybody's family. Like, when they first asked me to sponsor them, it's not like, hey, take these 2 pamphlets, write about it, and then give me your family's phone numbers so I can call them and tell them about you.
So as a sponsor, have you ever been asked to go to court for someone or write letters for people for court?
Have I? No, I don't think I have. I did ask a guy to show up in court for me one time, and he did not. And I was highly disappointed because he was a pretty good buddy of mine. And he was like, I don't show up in court for anybody. And hurt my feelings.
Yeah. Would you?
I think so. It would definitely depend on situation to situation. I mean, if they were, somebody that really established a relationship with me and I felt I could vouch for, I would do my best. I mean, if there's somebody who, asked me to sponsor them and then 8 months later I heard from them again and they wanted me to go to court for them, I don't know that I'd have much to say in the court. Yeah. Have you done that?
Yes, but it was almost the mix of those two things. So it was someone who came in, had some court stuff, was around for several months, like kept in contact with me on a regular basis. I think we even did some step work at one point, and then he had some court coming up, and it was less than a year, but it was several months, and we had actually gotten pretty close in that time. And then it's like it almost felt like right after court and he got out of whatever he needed to get out of, he stopped coming around and stopped calling. And then he invited me to his wedding, I think a year or so later, which was weird because I hadn't really talked to him much ever since then. Right. But at the time, I think he was still, abstinent or clean, but I don't think he was working any kind of program. And it felt a little bit like being used. I don't know if that was his real intention or not, but that's what it felt like. It felt like, oh, I get it. Your lawyer told you to come to meetings and get involved. And so he did, and he did all the stuff. And like I said, I didn't feel like the effort that he put in was disingenuous. But as soon as he got the outcome that he wanted, he stopped doing any work, stopped doing anything.
I've seen so many people, when they finish their 18 months probation or whatever it is that they need to see through, and I don't think that they were insincere. Like you said, I don't think they were just insincere on purpose the whole time, but I think that oversight leaves and they're like, well, I could do one to celebrate that or whatever it may be. I don't have to go through all these hoops anymore, and there's a freedom in that. And unfortunately, it's actually not a freedom, right? It just doesn't lead to that kind of freedom. What do you think about sponsoring people who have more time than you? How weird is that? Would you ask somebody with less time than you to sponsor you? I've seen it happen.
I think I would. I know of someone who has. I wouldn't necessarily care about the amount of time.
No?
I don't think.
Ego.
Of course, I can't. Yeah, I don't think so. But I've never done it. Like, I don't, and no one with more time than me has ever asked me to sponsor them, so I don't know.
When I've seen it, it's been close. It's like, one had 24, one had 22 or something, and they were real close. It was only like a year apart. But it just, I don't know. I've always thought, I have struggled enough to ask anybody to guide me, right? Like, I'm already got an ego problem where it's like, oh my God, I got to think this person knows something I don't, right? Like, is that possible? And so I just can't imagine asking somebody with less time. It would hurt my feelings, I think. Or younger. I think younger would fucking bother me too. I really do. I think it's got to be somebody
that's
little
where
older.
Younger would probably bother me more than less time.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow.
Huh.
I don't know. It's definitely interesting. Would you ever consider a female sponsor for yourself? I know you say you avoided the sponsoring women.
No, I mean, again, that might change if I was in a different area or I had a limited access to men that could sponsor me. But right now, I would say no. I don't think it would be healthy.
Why?
Well, this is where we get into the sexist shit that I'm going to probably get in trouble for. But
maybe
I
we
think
shouldn't go here.
There are different experiences that men have that women have.
Right.
I personally believe, just in my understanding, whatever, as ignorant and uneducated as it might be, that I have a tendency in my nature to focus on certain aspects of living that I think are predominantly male, being a provider, being the main, breadwinner of my household, being responsible for like the security, whatever you want to call it, aspect of our household. Like, there are certain aspects of my relationship with my wife, and then she's way better at other aspects of like the emotional support for our kids. And it's not that I can't learn to be one or the other, but the things that I struggle with in those areas tend to be different than the things that she struggles with in those areas.
And while I will 1,000%, why don't I keep saying 1,000%? That doesn't even fucking exist. Anyway, I agree with that, right? But so if you struggle in some areas that maybe, generally speaking, not to stereotype any one individual, but generally speaking, maybe women are better at those areas. Wouldn't it make sense to have a woman sponsor to help you get better in those areas that you struggle in? Like, another man, according to that thinking, is going to also struggle in those areas. And so how's he going to help you with it?
Well, it's an application of principles. Like, it's not, like, and this is where I get myself in trouble. I think there are certain things in my nature that are not going to change. You know what I mean? I can change it's almost like we talked about with the defects. Like, I can change my actions, but I can't change the thinking or the feelings behind that. I learned to recognize and identify, hey, this is what you're doing. Hey, let's try this instead. I think that, that's where another male perspective is going to help more.
So are there some thoughts you can change and some you can't? Is that where you believe that some of your thinking you can change, but some thinking just is never going to go anywhere? You can only change the actions? Or you can't change any thinking?
I think through repetitive action, you change thinking. Like,
okay.
That's what's that, neuroscience? Like, if you keep doing the same action, eventually your cognitive part changes too.
Right.
I think, again, the difference being, I can talk to my wife, I respect my wife and her recovery to the hilt. I don't think it's, it's not a matter of less or better or anything like that. If anything, she's got the best recovery of anybody that I know. You know what I mean?
Right.
She has more recovery than anybody that I know.
I won't argue with Billy on this.
Or an application of these principles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there isn't anyone that I think understands them deeper. So I don't think some man is in a way better. It's not a better sense. It's just to help me apply them in my life in a way that I can find incredibly useful on a daily basis. Because her and I have conversations, and I'm just like, what? You know what I mean? Like, my brain doesn't seem to work in the same way that hers does on certain. Maybe it can learn them. I'm really trying. There's certain aspects of this thing that she's really great at that I just miss every time. And I keep talking to her about it, and keep trying to learn it.
So what other thoughts? Is there anything else about sponsorship that you feel like we haven't? I mean, I know we did a lot of the pamphlets. I want to call them brochures as if we're trying to sell shit or something. But I know we touched on a lot of the pamphlets. Is there any personal sponsorship kind of information that you feel like we've neglected or missed, or anything that pops up?
Not well, only that it's like every other relationship, and you'll get out of it what you put into it. And if you have a sponsor that you don't call that much, or you don't use that much, or you don't see that much, and you don't maintain that relationship, you probably won't find it all that beneficial. And it may seem weird, like, why do I even need a sponsor? But if you have a relationship with someone that you admire and respect, and you keep in touch with that person, you know, and you keep in regular contact, you know, that is going to make that relationship really worthwhile and beneficial. I had a sponsor explain to me early on, like, one of the reasons that consistent contact is sort of needed is that I don't ever know when shit's going to hit the fan. You know what I mean? I don't ever know when things are going to go completely sideways. So if I'm not in a regular communication with my sponsor, I mean, I've had, you know, friends or whatever find out either their wife was cheating, or they were cheating and got caught by their wife, and now they're getting thrown out and their whole family's fucking disrupted and all this other stuff. Well, if you have a sponsor that you haven't talked to in 4 months, and they have no idea what the fuck's going on in your life, and all of a sudden, you know, you're thrown out because you're cheating or your wife's cheating and your life is in disarray, how likely are you to want to call this person? Hey, I know I haven't talked to you in months, and you probably didn't know, but I was having this affair, and no. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just gonna, it's probably gonna be more awkward than it is beneficial.
And how prepared are they, without knowing any of that and having it dropped in their lap, to give you any useful guidance? Like, it's going to be more of a shock situation of like, oh my fucking God, right? Like, they're going to be so floored by it, they won't be in a place where they're ready. Like, and not that, you know, look, I've sponsored guys that you know, cheat, whatever you want to call it. We can dress it up with some other words, but, you know, that step outside their relationship. And knowing that gives me, when the time comes, because they're probably gonna get caught. It's just, you know, it happens.
Right.
I'm ready for that. Like, I'm ready to say, hey, okay, well, this is what's been going on. We were kind of prepared that this was going to happen someday. We've had that conversation already, that this will probably end up this way if we don't stop, right? So it's just not as jarring of an experience for all parties involved. And you're right. You're more likely to just call in general. If you haven't talked to them, why would you bother then?
Right.
I would say for me, I definitely, you know, I sponsored probably for the wrong reason, like we addressed in that pamphlet. Like, don't do it for that reason. It's not my responsibility if people stay clean or not, but I do care. It's going to hurt. I've had some sponsees die. That fucking sucks, right? It's not a fun thing to deal with. Good reason for me to stay in touch with my sponsor, so that when those kind of feelings come, I have people to call. I do subscribe to having one particular sponsor in name, but I use lots of people that I value and respect. I say lots. When I mean lots, I mean like 5 or less, but I use them all as people I can go to with my shit. I don't just rely on this one sponsor for everything in my life. I have a lot of guides, right? And I like to get all their opinions on things. And sometimes guides are people I really, really respect and mentor. And sometimes it's just people, you know, that I care about. Right? I don't always think of them like, oh my God, you're the most spiritual person I know. Guide me in this situation. It's just like, well, what's your input? What do you got? I don't know. I'm willing to take anything.
Yeah.
There was one more thing I thought of and I lost it that quick. Did you have something to interject real quick?
No. I mean, like I say, I've found sponsorship relationships have been probably the greatest areas of growth for me, personal growth and otherwise, on things to do and things not to do. I've had a couple sponsors that aren't around anymore and have relapsed, and being close with those people has helped me to learn too, like, hey, what happened to them? How did they get in that situation, and how the fuck can I avoid that?
Yeah.
You know, because definitely. For most of them it didn't end up well, or for the ones, you know, I kept in touch with, it didn't end up well.
Right. And so, I don't know. I guess whatever I had wasn't all that important. It's just, you know, I think it's important that we seek out people in our life that can help us. And we look to people that inspire us or show us, something that we're looking for in our life, and we go and ask them and talk to them about how to get to that place, because that's what I'm looking for, is to improve and to get to a place where I see somebody else is trying to get to as well, right? They don't have to be, that's the exact point I was getting to. For a long time, it was that they had to be like above me, honestly, and I felt like it was an above me situation. You're my sponsor, you're way up there on that mountain, right? I don't look at it that way as much anymore. There's still a tiny little bit to that, but not as much. It's a lot more like, hey man, you're just another person that's like at the place I'm at, where we're trying to seek out this better thing, and you can help point my shit out, right? That I can't see because I'm too close to it. So you don't have to necessarily be above me to help me. You can be right where I'm at, living the same kind of life, and you can still see my shit better than I can.
Right. Yeah, and that's just it. I mean, I think that's important. Like, I don't look at it as above her, but like, we're all equal here, and I'm not any better. I don't want that responsibility. I mean, it's just like saying, I work in the oil business, so I can probably tell you a ton of shit about HVAC and oil stuff that you don't know. And that doesn't mean that I'm better than you because I know about this particular thing. You know what I mean? Like, I just have information in this particular area that because of what I do or how I've lived the last 20 years of my life. So, you know what I mean? And recovery is the same way. It's like I have this information because I've lived this way for a while, and I've had some experiences that I can share with others. The very last thing, and I won't try to tie this up too much, we talked about it a little bit, but was this idea of group sponsorship, and that like and it was in the AA pamphlet, they talked about it, was having like your home group or your group be responsible for helping newcomers or new people with sponsorship. And by that I mean like somebody that's brand new, maybe either coming out of treatment or never been to a meeting before, that your group have some sort of plan, if you want to call it, of action or process for dealing with that. I know in this area we tend to say, hey, who's new? And they say they're new, and we say, oh great, here's a phone list with some meeting list with some phone numbers on it or whatever, and then you hand that to the person and say, oh, nice to see you, and walk away. But this was more of a, like, your group should have an action plan for that kind of thing. Maybe you talk to them about what the program is, what a sponsor is, coming to more meetings, make sure they have a way to get to meetings, and making sure that they're connected with the program. And I thought thinking of that as like group sponsorship was kind of a neat idea.
It definitely is, and some of the ideas they had in there of like, sponsors, people who are available for sponsorship, raising their hands, having newcomer type meetings that are based on, the first few steps or just new principles. Like, this is something a lot of the other programs I've seen do. We don't do it quite so much in NA, which is interesting, but I've seen in some other places like Debtors Anonymous where it's like they take 15 minutes and address the newcomer, or Al-Anon has some meetings where it's just newcomer meetings and they only have experienced members kind of answer questions in a crosstalk type format, what we would refer to as crosstalk. And just having these kind of things, some of it is stuff we do already, but it's interesting to think that it's more of our responsibility. I've always looked at, and I think it says it in our group pamphlet, that sponsorship is the responsibility of the group in some way, shape, or form. My groups have always looked at that as, we need to help you find a sponsor if you're struggling with that, right? We need to push you towards it. And we'll ask in group conference, hey, have you found one yet? Like, if not, we're planning on having one for you by next month if you don't. So, it's kind of pushy, but at the same time, I think it's useful personally. Yeah, right. I think it is kind of the group should help us along with that.
Interesting.
So, I think we've thoroughly beaten sponsorship for today. I say that, and then we'll have a long list of people's ideas that are way better than what we thought of that we'll talk about next week. Supposedly next week we're going to talk to a guy from Smart Recovery. So that's exciting. That'll be more. I don't know a whole lot about that. And he's kind of got some not so into the A programs sort of thing. Yeah, I know. I don't want to do too much of that, but I'm a little excited to talk about that. And so we'll look forward to that, and we'll see you guys next week. Everybody stay safe out there.